here. Typically, it only takes place a couple times. I mean, it doesn't happen very often. I think this last Wednesday was the first time in like over 2 years where that's happened. And I think the last one may have even been for Hurricane Sally. So anyway, just a reminder, if you're ever unsure, look at the weather. We try to get it out to everybody, but obviously sometimes things happen and stuff doesn't get through. So anyway, we started looking at the flesh, and way back at the beginning, we looked at all the different types of flesh. It refers to our literal, the stuff that covers our body. It refers to all mankind. It refers to human nature. And it's the wicked part of man that doesn't go away when we get saved. And we looked at some of the works of the flesh. And we started talking about Christians doing good works. Now, the question was, should Christians do good works? What was the phrase I told you guys to remember when it comes to doing works? A phrase. I told you guys there is a critical phrase that most Christians miss, and if you miss this, you're going to be just doing stuff just because. And yes?
What was the question again?
What was the phrase I told you to remember? Okay, we do good works. Why? Because of what we are in Christ, not in order to become something better. Okay? We don't do good works in order to try to make God happy. You ever hear people say, we got to keep God happy? I don't see anywhere in Scripture where it talks about God being manipulated by what we do. Can you imagine if God was happy or sad with each one of us every day? How many Christians do we think might be in the world? Okay, how many of us made God happy today? How many of us made God... Can you imagine God on the throne? No, God is above all that. But sometimes we think in order to get God's approval, we've got to fill in the blank, check the box, right? Okay. If you're thinking that way, you don't understand salvation. You don't understand what Jesus did for you. You don't understand your position in Christ. You've been taught that. I understand a lot of believers have been taught that. We don't do good works in order to. We do good works because of. If you'll keep that phrase in mind, you'll make sure, because tonight we're going to look at doing good works in the flesh. And here's the thing, folks, good works in the flesh, are they ever acceptable to God? Absolutely, positively no. Now, will they accomplish some good things sometimes? Yes. Will things get accomplished sometimes? Yes, but what do you get out of it? Wood, hay, and stubble, okay? And so we're going to look at some of that. There are numerous passages in the Old Testament where Israel is condemned for following the law step by step. They did everything in some cases to the letter. And God says, you make me want to throw up. Why? Because they were doing it in order to, not because of. Okay? And so we've got to be very careful when we are doing things. You want to serve God with a rotten, haughty, prideful attitude? You go right ahead. Will you get some things accomplished? Absolutely. But when you stand before that judgment seat of Christ, you're going to see that stuff go up in smoke. Okay? And eventually God will deal with that attitude. I've seen a lot of people serve that way, and eventually God deals with it like a loving father would and should. So we just have to be very careful why we serve and how we serve. Okay, so let's look at some of this. We're on page 2 of the outline. Starting at that first paragraph, it says, the bad works of the flesh are from unregenerate man, absent of a conscience. And notice, a regenerate man whose flesh is out of control. The question has often been asked, can a believer do so-and-so? The answer is absolutely yes. You let a believer operate in the flesh, and there is absolutely nothing he will not do. And if we were going to be honest, like this is church, right? Some of us could probably give testimony to some of the things we've done as believers that were 100% thoroughbred flesh, right? We probably don't want to, because hopefully those are things, as Paul said, things that we're ashamed of. People are like, oh, you can't say that in church. You can't make people be ashamed. I didn't say it. God did, right? God said it through Paul, so deal with that one. But we can act like unregenerate people. And, sometimes all you need to see is people in traffic or people at a shopping mall, Christians at a shopping mall or in traffic or in the line. You ever listen to people in lines? I mean, like when there used to be lines at Walmart when you could stand in line for a cashier. It's amazing, the griping and complaining. And then I heard one lady, she just went on and on and on and on and on, just bashing the cashier and the system and just like, and then she invites the lady to church and she's checking out. And I'm thinking, you're kidding me. It just is what it is. So Christians can act like that. And those things are unacceptable or semi-unacceptable in society as well as they should be in church. But the next thing here's what we want to focus on. The good works of the flesh come from unregenerate man with a conscience. With a conscience means he's thinking about what he's doing. Or notice, regenerate man's fleshly offering to God. They are acceptable in normal society, acceptable in some churches, but notice they are unacceptable to God. If we are operating in the flesh, God is never going to accept that. People will say, prove that to me, show me. Okay, well, let's look at some things. Let's go first to Jeremiah. If you've never read the book of Jeremiah, you're missing out. Jeremiah is an incredible book. It amazes me the number of believers who have been saved longer than I've been alive and who have never read the prophets, major or minor prophets. We learn a lot about how God interacts with man in the prophets, especially religious man. And what we find is that God absolutely hates religion and he hates game playing. He hates checking the boxes. He absolutely hates it. We find that very clear in the prophets. One of the reasons God judged Judah and Israel is because they did these very things. So Jeremiah, let's look at chapter 7. Jeremiah chapter 7. Verse number, I've got the wrong verse on here. Are you kidding me? Hang on, because this is good. I just wrote down the wrong reference. I got to cheat and look it up. Sorry. When your brain doesn't work right, you do things. Okay, come on. This will just take me just a second. I've got one of these fancy Bibles that I can look stuff up. Okay, Jeremiah, I guess I'm right here. Jeremiah 7. Oh, you know what it was? You ever look at, when I tell you guys I'm losing my mind, I'm serious. This is a Bible I bring to church, right? Because my other Bible is my big Greek Hebrew study Bible, and it's fallen apart because I've had it for so long, and it's laid out different. And so in my mind, I'm looking at this page, and I'm like, wait a minute, the verse I'm looking for is not where it should be. Y'all ever do that? Yeah. Okay, good. It's not just me. All right, so let's go Jeremiah chapter 7. He's giving a description here of the religious leaders in Jerusalem. Notice in chapter 7, verse number 8, he says, "Behold, ye trust in lying words that cannot profit. Will ye steal, murder, and commit adultery, and swear falsely, and burn incense unto Baal, and walk after other gods who ye know not?" Now notice verse 10, "And come and stand before me in this house." Now, if we had to say, where are these people operating? Are they operating in the spirit or the flesh? And where are they going on a regular basis? To the house of God. All right? And say, "We are delivered to do all these denominations. In this house which is called by my name has become a den of robbers in your eyes. Behold, I, even the Lord, I have seen it, saith the Lord." He says, but go ye now unto my place which was in Shiloh, where I set my name at first, and see what I did to it for the wickedness of my people Israel. And now because ye have done all these works, saith the Lord, and I spake to you, rising up early and speaking, ye heard not, I called you, but ye answered not. Therefore will I do unto this house which is called by name, wherein ye trust, and unto the place which I gave you, and unto your fathers, as I've done to Shiloh. All right, who knows your biblical history? At this point in the Old Testament, where was Shiloh? See, you guys don't remember. You know why? Because that's all it was a memory. God had destroyed it. For the very same reason, he's getting ready to remove Israel from Jerusalem. They did the same thing in Shiloh. They lived how they wanted to, and they came in and played the church game and did God's things. They went through the offerings. They went through the sacrifices. They checked all the boxes. God says, listen, I see it. I see you operating in the flesh, and it means nothing to me. Get ready. Get your house in order, because I'm going to judge you. Okay, there is a danger to serving God in the flesh. We can do good things in the flesh, especially in the man's eyes, but God looks where? God looks in the heart. You know where we find that truth over and over? In the Old Testament, in the prophets. Okay? God is trying to tell the people of Judah, I love you guys. I want you to have a sincere heart toward me. There's one other verse in chapter 7. If you guys know Catholic folks and you ever try to deal with Catholics, notice verse 18. It says, this is a description of these people who come to the temple regularly. It says, the children gather wood, the fathers kindle fire, their women knead dough and make cakes and pour cakes to, notice who? The Queen of Heaven, to pour out drink offerings unto other God, that they may provoke me to anger. And of course, if you're Catholic, or not if you're Catholic, but if you know Catholics, who is the Queen of Heaven to them? Mary. You ever seen the little statue of Mary and a baby? You realize you can find that in every cult worldwide? Madonna and Child is what it's referred to in the Catholic Church. You find it in Hinduism. You find it even in some demon worship religions. And you see it plastered all over cathedrals. Anyway, I digress. All right, so let's go to another Old Testament passage here, back in Jeremiah. Let's go to Jeremiah chapter 23. Jeremiah chapter 23, verse number 9. God, this is another message from God to Jeremiah. He says, my heart is broken within me because of all the prostitutes and drug abusers and murderers in the land. Jeremiah 9:23. You guys there? Is that what it says? No. Why is God's heart broken? Because of the prophets. All my bones shake. I am like a drunken man, like a man wine hath overcometh. In other words, he's so upset and so distressed, he's literally staggering. All right, it's figurative, of course, because this is God speaking. And then he says this, because of the words of his holiness. For the land is full of adulterers, for because of swearing the land mourneth. The pleasant places of the wilderness are dried up. Their course is evil, and force is not right. For both prophet and priest are profane. Yea, in my house I have found their wickedness, saith the Lord. All right, so if you went to Jerusalem, what would you see when you went to the temple? On a daily basis, what was going on at the temple? Sacrifices. You would see the priests in their robes. You read later on that these people were actually going behind the scenes and worshiping demons. Now, they were doing good stuff, but their heart was not where their heart needed to be. Folks, if you're just going through the motions, you are serving in the flesh. And this is deceptive, it's dangerous, but here's the worst part, it's easy. It's so easy to slip in that mode of just going through the motions, right? And so we've got to be really careful. Let's look at one more. Isaiah chapter 1. We won't go to Malachi. Malachi chapter 3 is almost humorous. That's where the people are bringing sacrifices to the temple. Anybody remember Malachi 3? And the sacrifices are lame and blind, and God tells them through Malachi, hey, if you guys are so proud of these offerings, why don't you take them and give them to your governor? The irony there is that is something that would probably never even enter their mind to do something that obnoxious, classless, that something to show that amount of respect to a man, but they're doing it to God on a regular basis, expecting God to be satisfied with it. Okay? Isaiah chapter 1. This is a classic. In chapter 1, verses 1 through 6, he describes the spiritual condition of the people. Verse 7 through 10, he describes the country being destroyed and run down. And then he starts in verse number 11. He says, "To what purpose is the multitude of your sacrifices unto me, saith the Lord? I am full of your burnt offerings of rams." The idea of I'm full of there is the idea of, literally in Hebrew, full to the point of ready to be sick. Now, remember back in Exodus and Leviticus when the offerings were initiated, the phrase that God used for an offering when it was given correctly? It will be a sweet savor to me. Now he's like, I'm so sick of your offerings, I'm ready to throw up. Okay? We go on. He says, I delight not in the blood of bullocks or of lambs or of he-goats. He delights not in it, but it's what he told them they absolutely had to have fellowship. So they were still shedding the blood. God says, I don't take any pleasure in it. They were doing the work. They were going through the motions, right? Let's go on. It said, when you come to appear before me, who hath required this at your hand to tread my courts? Bring no more vain or empty oblations. Incense is an abomination to me, the new moons and Sabbaths, the calling of the symbols, I cannot away with it. It is iniquity, even the solemn meeting. Your new moons, your appointed feasts, my soul hateth. They are trouble unto me. I am weary to bear them. When you spread forth your hands, I will hide my eyes. Yea, when you make many prayers, I will not hear, for your hands are full of blood. They were doing everything the law required, to the letter in some cases. God says, you know what? I don't want it. Take it away. So, all that is to get you to see that simply doing something right doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be acceptable to God. If we're operating in the flesh and operating with a bad attitude or wrong motives, it's not acceptable to God. Now again, we may accomplish something, we may get something done, and it may look good, but why are we doing it? What's our motive? Is it to please God? Is it to glorify Him? Is it because it's just got to get done? If we don't get this done and done right, it's just not. Well, who's that all about? It's about man. That's about me, right? And so there's got to be a balance, okay? So let's go back to the outline. When we look at the works of the flesh, let's go to Galatians chapter 5. I see if anybody knew. Chapter 5. I did know that one for real. Galatians chapter 5 breaks down the works of the flesh. And what we've got here on this, on your outline are some things that can fall into the category, sometimes not always, of looking good in the works of the flesh, and sometimes they're just, the flesh is just full out of control. All right, so Galatians 5, verse number 17, or excuse me, verse number 19. Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these. Again, notice that word manifest. That word manifest in the New Testament. Anybody have an idea what you can do to help you remember what that word means? Yes?
I always remember like it's a ship manifest. You see this ship, I don't know what's in it, but when I see the manifest, now I know.
Okay, that's close. Even clearer, the word means to be brightly or clearly seen. And so I was thinking not a ship, I was thinking a lighthouse on a dark night. You ever been down to the beach or even driving across 3 Mile Bridge at night and look off to your, well, if you're coming from Gulf Breeze, look to your left, what do you see out of the corner of your eye? You see this light flash. And a few seconds later, you see this light flash again. It's a lighthouse over at NAS. You can see it from a long way. It's clearly seen, okay? Even on a foggy night, you can still see that thing. So the works of the flesh, what he's saying here, the works of the flesh are going to tell on you. If you're operating in the flesh, it's going to catch up with you. Now, again, we can make it look good, right? We can, we're joking around about painting the metal bars earlier. Rahaz, if he's out there, he's hearing it. Oh, those are the metal bars on the fence. If you paint over those metal bars and you don't get all the rust off and sandblast them and prime them, what's going to happen in about a week? The rust is going to come right back through. They're going to look good, and even from a distance, they'll look okay. Like when you're driving down the road in front of the college down there at 70, like those Puerto Ricans do, they're like, phew, 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 Fence looks really good. But if you're out there on the sidewalk walking and looking at it, you're like, man, this is bad. It's clear, okay? So that's the idea of that word manifest. And we see it over and over throughout the New Testament used in a positive and a negative context. We see passages about where the love of God was manifest, all right? And where do we see the love of God manifest? Clearly seen at the cross, right? And all Christ did for us. So it's a neat little word. That's why I kind of paused on it there. But anyway, the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revelings, and such like. Meaning the list is not exhaustive. There are more out there. He's just not listing them. And so what we've got here, these are broken down in some... Now, understand, these are all wicked, okay? Some are overtly wicked, some are just out there in your face. And that's what we've done, is kind of broken the list up. So idolatry. Can idolatry look good? Yes. Do we have idols in Baptist churches? Yes, we do. What are some idols in Baptist churches? Pastors. People follow pastors. Schedule. Tradition. Where we sit. What else? What are some other idols we have? I sat by a pastor at a pastor's conference this week who literally flipped out because pastors are now wearing shirts other than white in the pulpit, because we are executives. We are the chief executive officers of the church, and we have to reflect the fact that we are executives. I'm like, I just told him, like, sir, my Bible says that pastor is a shepherd and a servant. And dude looked at me like I was from another planet. Literally. He didn't. He's like, well, but the state says we are the chief executive officer of the corporation. I'm like, who cares what the state says? Is that why we do it? We do it in our church because you want to take something like that so you can preach, wear a white shirt? Come on, dude.
I think it's kind of the opposite, but the lack of technology. Like, we don't want to use technology because that's liberal. And sometimes people get proud about doing things the old way, even though
the old paths, brother. We take the old paths when they've really never been on an old path in their life. You know, we're like the church in Acts. Well, except we got air conditioning and electricity and piano and organ and lights. And inside, yeah. We're not in people's homes. But other than that, we're just like the church in Acts. No, you're not, okay? We got to be careful. We can take something good, those examples we looked at in the Old Testament of worship. Where did those things come from? Who gave those things to the people of Israel? God did. Those weren't man-made things, but they're things that man took and corrupted in his own way. And so the things that we're talking about, none of the things we're talking, is it bad to wear a white shirt when you preach? No. Is it a must? No. I mean, maybe if you go to 2 Exceptions chapter 3, you can find it there, but even then it's probably out of context, right? So there's idolatry. Can we make serving in church an idol? We absolutely can. We can put a ministry above God. And listen, we can, what church in the Bible put Jesus out of the church? Laodicea. Remember? Laodicea chapter 3, Jesus says, behold, I stand in the door. That is not a gospel imitation, folks. I understand how it's been preached for years, right? Behold, I stand at the door. No, this is Jesus talking to his church. Hey, like, let me back in. Remember, because that was a self-sufficient church, the church that thought they had everything, the church that thought they were rich. But remember, Jesus told them, you are naked and blind and poor. And so he was outside the door. These are people that were doing a lot of good works, but they left Christ out of them, okay? Very easy to fall into this. Any of us could do this at any time. How do we avoid it? We serve as we walk in the Spirit. We serve sensitive to what God would have us do. We serve not out of routine. While we need a routine, right? As we serve, we don't serve out of routine. Does that make sense? We don't let our service become routine while we do the routine, because we still need to seek God's face for what we're doing. So idolatry is something that the lost religious people can fall into, and yet it's something that those of us who know Christ, if we're not very careful, we can let me throw this one out. Can personal devotions become an idol? Yes. If you're just going through a routine and not getting anything out of it, how different is that from what was going on in Isaiah chapter 1? Well, you see, Pastor, but see, no, how different is it? Those people were meeting every requirement of the law, and God said it's about to make me sick because they're just going through the motions.
Kids know it.
Kids, yeah, you can't snow your kids long, okay? Kids see it quick. That's why so many kids DD out of these church walls when they turn 18, right? They DD mile quick. It's just, I'm sorry, that was Vietnamese. I lapsed into another language here. They see it. And so we've got to be careful. It's very easy to serve in the flesh, okay? Of course, variance, this is out of control. We'll go down to under control, then we'll do the out of control. Heresies, what are heresies? Not necessarily false doctrine. Can be, but here's a heresy, okay? I'm going to become a heretic for a minute. The only way to be spiritual in this church is if you learn to bark like a good Georgia Bulldog fan. Those people that want to chop and chant and all that and talk about whatever that thing is on the sideline of Ohio State that looks like some kind of nut, all you people need to get... that's heresy. You've got to dress just like me in order to be spiritual. You've got to wear a certain piece of clothing. That's heresy. Now, in a lot of places, it's been made to look really good. But when you start focusing on those things, that's a heretical teaching, okay? It's a false teaching that says, in order to, remember that? Not in order to, but why? Because. That'll help you sense out heresy real quick. We don't do something in order to get something from God or order to impress God. We do what we do because of what God did for us, okay? Not in order to, but because of. Witchcraft. Now, when we think witchcraft, what do we typically think? Some woman riding a broom with a pointed hat on and a wart on her nose, right? That's typically what we think of witchcraft. The idea of witchcraft here is the idea of superstitions. You ever met any superstitious Baptists when it comes to church stuff? Absolutely. Okay? Be careful. These things are out there. These are works of the flesh. Hatred. The brand of fundamentalism I grew up in, there's only one word I can use to describe them: hateful. I knew pastors that would rather go out in the side yard of the church and literally have a fist fight over something than share a gospel with somebody. And they thought they were spiritual people. I heard more racial jokes from some of the pastors I knew, hateful racial jokes, than I heard from lost guys in the army. And yet these men thought they were spiritual. These were the men leading our fundamental churches. If you could have, like Jeremiah does in Jeremiah, where he pulls the cover back and we see those priests worshiping demons, if you could see and hear some of the things I've heard come out of the mouths of some of the leaders of fundamentalism, the leaders of our Christian colleges, you would be shocked. And you would understand why I'm like, no, I'm not going there. Okay? That's the idea here of this idea of hatred. How many fights started in the 70s, 80s, and 90s over separation? When it wasn't really an issue of separation, it was an issue of, I don't like that guy, we're separating from him. I knew a pastor in our town in Huntsville that told his people that they were probably the only saved people in town because their men all wore ties and their women all wore skirts. And if you didn't do that, then you were probably lost. I think, didn't one of your kids encounter that? I think one of your daughters told me they encountered something like that once. Yeah. That's very common. That's hatred. That's the flesh. Now, does that look good when you walk in and you see it? You can. But it's just doing something to meet a man-made thing. Uncleanliness. This is the idea of something going on covering up our thoughts. Is it easy to have bad thoughts when you're smiling at somebody? It really is. There have been some times in ministry where people have unfairly and unrightly gotten onto me, and I have to smile and take it. But can we be honest here? Can I be honest with you guys? No, I don't know if I should say this. No. Anyway, I won't say this. Conscience. I'm just sharing what went through my mind, right? I had been trained to eliminate people, and this thought ran through my mind as this he's literally in my face, right? And I'm thinking, I can take you out before your next breath. That was this right here, okay? I'm just being honest. That was uncleanly. That was not a thought motivated by the Spirit. And literally, I could have done it. Still can. So, no, I'm just kidding. But that's an example, okay, of how easy we can get there. Now, hopefully, you guys don't think about taking people out when they get in your face, but I was young and foolish, right? What else can I say? So then we have the social works of the flesh, seditions, dissension and division. This is so common in churches, I probably don't even have to spend much time on it, right? People want their way, it's got to be done their way. If it's not done their way, they're going to stir up trouble till they get it their way. That's a Christ-like attitude, right? Because Jesus had to have his way. That's what we find in Galatians chapter 2, right? He didn't humble himself and become obedient to death because he's the creator of the universe and he's going to do it his way. Oh, wait, no, that's not what it says there, is it? Okay, so the flesh says, I'm going to do it the way I'm going to do it. It's got to be my way or the highway, blah, 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 yap, yap, yap. And then we come up with 100 different ways to try to rationalize the flesh to make it sound right. In the meantime, we're dividing the body. It's interesting, we find something common in the Old and New Testament. Even though the church is not in the Old Testament, God says he hates those who divide the body. In the Old Testament, guess what he says in the New Testament? Same thing. That is something God does not take lightly, folks. Creating division and dissension, and yet that's what the word sedition means. And then the word envy is the idea of spites, again, the idea of gossiping, the idea of backbiting, cutting people down, the damage we can do with our tongues. And so these are things that we can do while we're doing good things. We can be involved in these religious works of the flesh. And again, when pastors who are interviewed, the interviews, the first time I heard this was back in the 80s, and the last time I heard it was just last year. Pastors interviewed asked the biggest problem in your church. Number one answer from last year, or the last one I read, is over 1,500 pastors from, now these were different flavors, right, across the board. Number one problem, carnality. What was the number one problem in the church of Corinth? Carnality. And you go back and you read about those people in every chapter in the book of 1 Corinthians deals with the issue in the church. You know what characteristics you see rising to the top out of the church of Corinth over and over? Idolatry, heresies, witchcraft, hatred, uncleanness, seditions, envyings. The church at Corinth was probably one of the most spiritually gifted churches that has ever existed, according to some theologians. That's why Paul spends so much time on spiritual gifts with that church. They had all the gifts there. They were spiritually blessed, and yet they were a mess. They were a wreck because they're operating in the flesh. So remember, we'll look at the other ones next week because they're really obvious. We know when we're there or somebody's there, and a lot of these are characteristics of lost people. But this is the area, this first left-hand column is the area where I think if we're honest, many of us have or we currently may struggle in, and so we've got to be really careful. The answer to these, what is the answer to these issues? How do we deal with it? Yeah, let's back up to verse number 14, or verse 14, verse 15, verse 16. I'll get it. This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. So if we're walking in the Spirit is in control. That means some of the things that we think we've got to get done and have to be done our way, Guess what? If the Spirit's in control, you know what He may lead us to do? Not to do that. Or, you know what? He may lead us to do it a way we've never done before. We've never done it that way before. But if we're just in the mode of this is the way I've always done it, this is the way it's going to be because I am who I am and I am what I am, then we can, more than likely, if we're thinking that way, we're already walking in the flesh. So anyway, I hope this will help you. I know for me, it hits me between the eyes every time I read through it, just being honest with you. It reminds me of some of the thoughts that have run through my mind like I've shared, but it also reminds me of how easy it is to fall into these traps. So hope this will help you. I don't want you to be like me and have a massive pile of wood, hay, and stubble waiting for you at the, you wouldn't even get close to mine to roast marshmallows or anything. You'd be like the guys that threw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the furnace. You would burn up with them because I've got a massive pile. The reality is it doesn't have to be that way. We can walk in the Spirit. So any questions or comments? Martin.
One of the things when I was a Catholic for 18 years, we never did call Mary the Queen of Heaven, but we would say that she was the Mother of God, that she could make him change his mind.
Mm-hmm.
That's it's still bad.
Yeah.
But that's what we thought.
Yep. Good stuff. It helps to know some of these things in Scripture, too, when you're dealing with folks, that what Scripture says about some of the stuff they believe. So, good. Anything else? All right, how about prayer? Well, how about praises? We have praises tonight?